And it was only, I'd say, about 7 to 8 years ago, I had a cultural awakening. And this is going to sound silly for some people, but I was like, oh shit, I'm brown. In Australia, you have this joke, or first generation Indian or Sri Lankans are like this joke that you're a coconut, you're brown on the outside, white on the inside.
Wow. I think what you guys have just described did not happen overnight. We're talking about hundreds of years of this programming, and it's not programming that just happened in Africa, it happened around the world.
Welcome to the Bicultural Edge, the podcast by and for the bicultural, the African diaspora, and friends. In each episode, we'll be exploring the many ways how our culture, our lived experience, but most importantly, our identity help us and they shape how we navigate different worlds. Welcome to the Bicultural Edge. My name is Kemo Camara. I'm the founder of Omek, and I'm super excited about the conversation today because today's episode is focused on understanding and going deeper about the conversation on bicultural identity. And then I have two amazing guest speakers today to have this conversation. The reason I say two amazing guest speakers is not because of what they do and then their professional accolade and all that stuff, but it's because I have had the privilege to have a conversation with them about this topic, and I know how passionate they are. So, on the first side, let's start with Christopher William, that I call the big bro. I'm sure he's gonna be like, what does that mean?
It's okay.
Christopher and I, we have had a lot of dinner table conversation about this topic, and we're very passionate about this. So that's why I'm excited to have you on the panel.
Thanks for having me. And
next to me, we have Vanessa, that will go by Ness. Yes?
Yes.
And Vanessa is very, very passionate about this conversation, about this topic, and she's written a lot about it. And then I've seen some of your LinkedIn posts. I'm like, whoa, this is really dope. So I'm excited. Are you ready?
Ready.
We are.
Okay, so let's get started. I think where I want to start up, let's start from the beginning. Yeah? If you both can probably introduce yourself, but the way I want you to do that is to tell us where you come from, where have you been, and how does that show up today in your day-to-day life? So if you can quickly, Christopher, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. As you say, we've known each other for a while, but I'm excited to be here. So I was born in Sierra Leone and moved to the U.S. when I was about 19 and attended college in the U.S. and eventually started to work there, got married, became a citizen, and continued to work in the corporate environment right up till 2018. And that's when I left and started to work independently. But the biggest story outside of that is that the last 10, 15 years I've been working internationally. So I was an expat in Asia, in the US, and in East Africa, and now live in the Netherlands. So the multicultural element of my story spans, early years in West Africa, and then professional and life, essentially, since I was 19, in many parts of the world, 4 continents, 14 cities. And how has that informed what I do? Well, it's made me, and I think we'll get more into this in this conversation, it's made me know in a very simple and basic way what I am and who I am. And the reason is because my body has been transported and spends time in lots of different places. So I've had to navigate being one thing and then being adaptable at the same time. So that, for me, is the essence of my, I don't even say bicultural as much as a multicultural experience. It's been grounded in some ways, but being flexible in others. And that's generally how I approach life these days.
Ness?
Hi, I'm Vanessa Monsequeira, but I was born Chitraleka Vanessa Wadhwani, and that's also part of my story. So I was born in Mumbai, India. My mum's side is Catholic, my dad's side was Hindu. For that and many other reasons, they divorced when I was 1 year old. My mum and I moved to Australia when I was 4 years old. And it's really interesting when you move to a new country as a young child and you're holding two identities, but you don't have the language and you're not sure. So this was in the 90s in Australia. And my mum herself, there was that pressure to assimilate. And as I grew up as a child and a teenager, there's this concept of being un-Australian. And Australia, you know, in that time, maybe still, it was very kind of segmented in the culture. So like if you were from India and Sri Lanka, you were known as the curries. If you were from, had ethnicity from Italy or from Greece and those sorts of Mediterranean, you were known as a wog. So these aren't really nice terms, but it was really already the playground really segmented. And for me, it was this bit of like, oh, I need to make sure my accent is Australian because I was 4. I had like a little Indian English accent and anything to just be and belong. And so that really started this journey of bearing parts of my identity and who I was as a first generation Indian Australian, except for the food. The food's amazing. We never denied that. Never will deny that. But different parts. And it wasn't, now it's kind of cool to be Indian. Everyone's doing yoga and Ayurveda. They're the CEOs of top tech companies. But it wasn't cool back then. And so you're like, no, let's hide these parts. And I entered the corporate workspace. I've worked in tech, similar to Christopher's journey. I've worked in France, in the UK, in Italy, in Australia, and lived in these different places. And it really kind of opened my eyes to this different level of bicultural or multiculturalism and the different levels of lack of equity or justice in that. But at a junior level, I didn't see that. And it was only, I'd say, about 7 to 8 years ago, I had a cultural awakening. And this is going to sound silly for some people, but I was like, oh shit, I'm brown. Like, because in Australia you have this joke, or first generation Indian or Sri Lankans are like this joke that you're a coconut, you're brown on the outside, white on the inside. Maybe not out of choice, but out of survival and sometimes out of choice. So as you said, Kemo, I've been writing more about that awakening and who I am, and now owning that and owning my name, Chitraleka. I got it tattooed on my arm last year. And that journey of how does that not just permeate for me and how I help other biculturals in owning their identity, but also as a former CHRO in tech, how do I actually build more fair and equitable systems for all peoples?
Thank you so much for sharing that, and you can see the similarity, but also like how each of your journey is like so distinct. And now, with that being said, I'd love to hear, when did you start like noticing and really like stepping into that space? I think you opened your conversation because your body's been in so many different places, and to the point where now you know there's one body, but able to adapt in those different places. When did you start realizing the nuances, navigating these places, like the nuances of like that bicultural and or moving between cultural framework? When did you start realizing like that bicultural identity?
No, that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
So growing up in Sierra Leone in the 70s was an interesting thing in itself, because this was immediately post-independence, which happened in the late 60s. And almost immediately after, or shortly thereafter, the country sort of transitioned into a lot of political infighting, and ultimately that led to very corrupt, way of governing that spiraled ultimately in national decline and lots of other things. So we as kids were always curious almost immediately, and our parents, I think, helped drive that in the rest of the world, because the idea was, at some point you might have to go to school, and maybe it might not be here, it might be abroad. So at a very young age, I was thinking of going to university outside of Sierra Leone. And so you program yourself to become more interested and curious about the world. And we listened to the BBC, we read lots of books. And I think what that did, though, was expose me not just to the world and this life beyond the borders, but at the same time, I think it made me appreciate how different we were, but in a negative way. And we were very aware, even as kids, that we were sort of the outliers. I mean, Africa, Sierra Leone was this outlier to this big world, and so when I came to the U.S., but at the same time, I didn't know what that meant. I think I was aware that, okay, we have this sort of disparity in how we are viewed, but I didn't know what that meant. When I moved to the U.S. is when I started to understand, the sort of hierarchy of country and nations and cultures and races, which I had never quite wrapped my head. Conceptually, I think I knew what that was, but I'd never experienced it. So I think in the U.S. is when you realize that, wow, you run the risk of being lost in this shuffling of the deck. And therefore, if you let what you are be defined a certain way and shuffled along with everything else, it gets lost, and then you won't have anything to stand on. And that's when I started to rethink the whole Africa experience and understand its value and hold on to that value. Because no matter what it was, it had brought me to the US with a very high degree of education and ability to navigate things. So it wasn't useless. And I think that's when I realized that, this thing is actually not useless. As much as when we were there, we thought it was, this is just bad. When I came to the US, I actually valued it even more because I knew that I had to hold on to it or it would be lost in the shuffle. So I think that was for me the start of understanding that there's a hierarchy. And what I was being relegated to the bottom of that pyramid. And if I let that happen, then I would have to go borrow something else, which I wasn't prepared to do because I was never going to be fully of anything else. And therefore I had to appreciate, reflect, and then build awareness about what my experiences had been and own it as I moved forward. And that started this journey of really understanding that the anchoring is important. And the anchor has changed over time. I will get into that. But the anchor is important to define who you are, or then you get redefined by others who have already created their own hierarchy without your permission.
Okay. So, Vanessa, I want to come back to you on that point because you mentioned like how the culture is like almost like growing up, right? It was defined in the playground where like if you're brown and from India or Pakistan, then it's called curry, and then Italian, and then like a different name. And so it's already defined, and you have to figure out how to navigate at such a young age. And there's this concept too, like at Omek, we always believe like your bicultural identity is it's not just about the navigating this culture, but like it comes with the time. You have to put in the effort in, right? And so whenever I have this conversation or like through a workshop or companies, like we have these 4 stages that you have to go through. The beginning, the first stage is like being aware, right? Just you have, like I think you mentioned this, like being aware. You go to the US and you confronted to this situation, and then now you have to be like aware that you're navigating this, and there's this concept exists, right? If you don't know something, that you can't solve a problem that you don't know, right? So the awareness is the first thing, and the second thing, you have to do something about it. So you have to be willing. The willingness to take an action to do something, which is the second stage. And the third stage, then now you have to put on the work. You have to educate yourself. And I think that's the part we're going to get more into, like what type of effort that you have to do to really be able to own this thing for yourself. And the fourth stage is the part where you actually, now that you learn more, you have tools and resources at your disposal, you are able to leverage this now as your superpower. So those are the 4 stages. And so I want to come back with that in mind. Like, how did you start navigating like the awareness aspect, and then when did you start realizing really like, man, this actually is not a disadvantage if I know more about it?
Yeah. And I probably wasn't thinking advantage or disadvantage. It's just, it's kind of, you're talking about, you can run, but you can't hide from your own cultural identity. Like, I changed my name officially out of Chitraleka, and then I was like, that name means as beautiful as a sketch. I was like, I don't want that name. I was like, now I'm just like, what were you doing? So I've kind of reclaimed it. I've tattooed on my arm for the fact that you can run, but you can't hide. And I think around 8 years ago, there was just this realization. I think there was a lot happening in the world. There was a lot happening for me. And also as a leader, I truly believe when you're a senior leader, It's not about strategy and prioritization. They're like the tactical skills you should have already built. 80% of leadership at a senior level is leading self. And that's multiple levels of leading self, like your inner child, your emotional world, our cultural upbringing that shapes us. There's an Indian philosopher that says, you think your thoughts, you don't. You think your culture's thoughts. And so like that sort of leadership work I did in the workplace probably helped break through. And once you start that journey, just a flood of shame of all of the cultural identity that I buried in my childhood. Like my mum would tell me like about cultural inequity in the workplace. I'd be like, yeah, no, it's fine. Stop making such a big deal. And it's like, oh, the shame I feel now. Or my dad, when I was probably around 6 or 7, he has always stayed in India. We're in a rickshaw, and I'll never forget this. We're on a dusty road, and he was telling me how India was one of the richest countries in the world, had one of the best GDPs, it had a lot of riches, and then colonialism happened. And I was looking around, and I was like, there's cows eating plastic, it's super dirty and dusty, and I just kind of brushed it off. And it's like, for me, to remember that so vividly means like it probably implanted in my brain as a child, and it's all come out now. And I think for me, that cultural journey is giving myself love and compassion. That was a young child trying to assimilate into a new culture. But then it turned into this curiosity and the work. It's like, what was going on? Because we're not taught about it at school. Like the internet kind of came into being when we were growing up. Now everyone's got access to internet and AI. But that information asymmetry, you're kind of like Christopher was saying, like there's a passport or like country hierarchy. Why? Wasn't in Encyclopedia Britannica or in Carter, if anyone knows what that is, like old school versions of the internet. So we all grew up in this information asymmetry, and now the information is available. So I'd say the key stepping stones to that journey was reading more about colonialism, about my family's history of partition in India, but also going, there's, Omek started as a community for the African diaspora. Now I know it's for all biculturals, but I was like, well, what are the stereotypes UNES hold about different countries in Africa? Where did that come from? I started reading and researching more. And I think then there was a different piece around some of the conflict that's happening in the Middle East. And I was like, someone told me, you're brown, you should be taking a side. And I was just like, I don't even know what the history is. And then I start looking at the history and it's all interlinked. And you're like, a lot, I think, of the work is understanding buried history. It's understanding power dynamics. And it's still dealing with the shame. Like as an Indian, it's not like we've done the best things globally in the world in certain parts as well. And it's actually a key moment for me where I was like, this is the time when I joined Omek. We're in South Africa. And I didn't realise that a lot of Indians had been taken there to build the railroads. I didn't realise a lot of Indians chose to go to West Africa to become the buffer class, and there was a shame in that as well. And you're like, whoa, our histories are so intermingled and there's so much going on. And I don't have an answer. I don't have the full plan, but I'm on the journey, and that's exciting. And I think till we start looking at the past, not as a way of shame, but as a way to build the building blocks of the future, we're never really going to understand and have deep and meaty conversations.
I love that. I love hearing about your journey. And I remember you posting about your name, and then when you added on your LinkedIn post, and then like we had this conversation before, I think a month before, and then I saw that post. I had this like warm feeling inside, and for me, my journey also similar to yours. I went to the U.S. and even though I didn't run away because I left the U.S., I was I had my formative year there. I was already in my early 20s. But like Africa wasn't cool. Being an African wasn't cool. And then you try to be an American. But I didn't. And back home, we were taught like everything, history, all the education was a colonial education. And so when I got into this journey in fighting between my African culture and my American culture, and then I started embracing both. And then that led me to learn more about my African culture. And then I quickly realized I did not know anything about my culture. I did not know anything about my history. And then I got into this learning, and then it became this decolonization. Like I realized how much my mind was colonized. Every single time I was educated, like everything that was passed to me, my education was colonial thing. So I got in this journey of like decolonizing my mind, and it was the most beautiful thing.
It's the most beautiful. It's a decolonizing mind and body. So one of my favorite book. I'm such a big book nerd, but one of my favorite bookshops in the world is the Brick Lane bookshop in London, because you find really beautiful books of authors from different demographies, and there's a British author of African descent, Afua Hirsch, and she writes the books of not just decolonizing mind, but for women, particularly decolonizing body, how our hair is, what we wear, and it's just, I was just like, I feel so grateful that this literature is out there. I was coaching a lady in the US, and she worked at one of the big tech companies, and her child was mixed Caucasian American and Native American. And he wrote his college entry essay on colonialism, executed as designed, and got in. And I was like, that would have never happened in our time 20 years ago. So it's an excitement of not of blame and shame, but like, let's explore the meaty conversations, as I say.
And let's explore the conversation. And that's the reason we're having this conversation, because now we have the opportunity, right, to use a medium that's available and then to normalize this conversation. And so from your perspective as well, I think you, again, very conscious, went through, grow up in at least a formative year in Africa, came to the US and started realizing these things, and quickly started, claiming, to your African identity, because it brought you to where you are today. And you've been in Asia, you lived in Europe now. And so when did you really start not only realizing, but doing the work to start giving yourself the permission to claim all this, everything as for yourself?
That's a really good question. And the distinction about the self-awareness being one part of the process, but doing something about it is another part of the process. And I think for a long time, I didn't do much about it. I don't think I knew what to do. I think I was more in a state of professional momentum, so that was taking all my time and my focus. And what the trade-offs were and what the implications of those trade-offs wasn't clear. So you sort of just go along. You intellectually know what's going on, but you haven't really navigated it, and you definitely haven't made conscious choices that are different. And that takes a while. I think what you guys have just described did not happen overnight. We're talking about hundreds of years of this programming, and it's not programming that just happened in Africa. It happened around the world. So even as you trying to redefine your own sense of self, and you have a lot of work to do there, you don't have a lot of control in terms of redefining the environments that you're in.
Yes.
So those environments still see you the way they've decided over time of being programmed to see you. So you kind of have to navigate with people or a context that is not evolving like you are evolving. And so it's this tension, and then you always are very conscious, am I too far ahead, and how do I manage my own life so that I don't get flushed out of the system completely, because I'm now this foreign body that seems to be rebelling against it. So there's this negotiation that happens, and this period of negotiation that happened, at least for me, for much of the last 10, 15 years. And I've slowly figured out, because I'm getting wiser and getting more comfortable with myself, learning, growing, you now can begin to, sever elements more consciously and more intentionally. And that doesn't end, I think. I think that goes on, but you get better over time. So it's not one thing, it's a series of steps along the way.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was, working, first I was just all in working, and then I started to decide where I wanted to work and who I wanted to work with. I decided I wanted to leave the US for a while and live in Asia and be in a situation that was a majority, European or European heritage, because I wanted to experience other parts of the world. And that took me to living in Africa, and then was then deciding that I didn't want to work for a large company anymore because too many compromises and trade-offs. So you're making a very different set of choices there. And nowadays I decide what kind of work I do. So some kinds of work I don't do at all because I didn't enjoy it. Only things that I feel like are adding value to other people and uplifting people in this exploration of their own, or helping them navigate all the tensions in their lives. So it's been systems of change. And then I worked on a book, which is just to share what this dynamic and these changes so that people can be more equipped as they are sort of trying to navigate them. And I think it's going to continue because the world may or not be changing as we are changing. And you still have to make the moves and make the changes for yourself. And that tension is a difficult one to manage for some, easier for others, but it's definitely a tension that needs to be managed, and that takes a while.
Can I jump in on that?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it takes, and I'm teeing Christopher up here, it takes courage.
Absolutely.
And that is the theme of when I first met or heard Christopher was at the last Omek summit. And Christopher, I've just talked to him like 20 times about his panel. He's probably like, what did I say in that panel there? It's like, you must have like, but basically there are many things he said. And I know that since you've written a book on courage, because that's what it takes from awareness to action.
Yeah.
There's a courage leap.
Absolutely.
And one question that came up in that panel, like it hit a lot of the audience, and someone asked Christopher, there was Gwen and Kobe on that panel, and they said when you get to an executive level, and that was as a person of colour, could be people from different demographies, not everyone reaches back down to pull up. What happened? And I think your answer and some of the panel's answer was so beautiful. It's kind of, there was a level of understanding that for some people, they're like, I've worked so hard to get here. If I reach back down, is that power structure going to expel me like that organism? At the same time, for those of us who do reach back down, and I know I've had this through creating systems of fairness, I've been called out by executives for creating systems that are too fair, or you take a hit. And it's not like you can just come out in a town hall and go like, rah, rah. It's a delicate system of coaxing and helping different leaders see different histories and different privileges in a gentle way so we don't scare people. So I think as DEI is kind of morphing into a language of cultural intelligence, which is, I think, is beautiful. I think there's this piece, though, of how do we navigate it in the workplace? And there's different pieces of, I like the question that I ask myself on the last sort of 8 or 9 years, which is, who am I becoming? Who am I becoming? And recently, Trevor Noah did a beautiful Netflix special with everything happening in the world. And his question was more or less along the lines of, when history calls, who will you be? And for me, it leads back to a call to courage.
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting here is that, like I said, this took a while to get to what we are dealing with today. And so it's not going to change overnight. And so this hesitation that some of us have, and trepidation maybe, is important not to construe that as you sold out or you're compartmentalizing, because it needs some care. And courage is about being deliberative. It's not being rash. That's recklessness. That's arrogance. That has a very different name. It's not courage. Courage is very thoughtful. And if you're building, which I think we are all intending to do for the long term, not just for ourselves, but for our children and generations that come after us, we have to not just go through our experience, we have to live and teach people the pathway through which they can also go through that evolution. And it's a journey that's going to be messy. It's not always going to be clean. But we have to stay at it and stay focused and continue to evolve, because it's almost like a plane. You're being told on the plane, if something's happening, put the mask on yourself and then put it on others, because you're trying to be there for the people that you want to be there for.
Before we go any further, let me tell you a bit what Omek is all about. Omek is a community-based career and professional development platform that connects bicultural talent with global organization and brands, but also with meaningful resources and an opportunity. Here's my call to action for you. Go right away on the website and register and to join our digital hub, our digital platform for free, where you will have the opportunity to meet and connect and engage with the global community of other bicultural, and also be able to participate in workshop, meet new people, and find job. Together is the only way forward.
And you're trying to leave something for them, and you can't help them if you're dead.
Yeah.
So it's and it's not perfect. And it's not meant to be because it's messy, and that's the reality.
Yeah.
So I think that's what makes it difficult.
I think that, and you said something that made me think of an analogy. As you go through this journey, I'm not going to lie, I've had therapy, and now I'm looking for a brown therapist who can understand my journey. But that therapist was like, Ness, when you do some of these different transitional journeys, it's like you're on a radio frequency and your radio frequency changes. But friends and family or different colleagues, they're still on this radio frequency. Okay. So either you might work at different frequencies and it might not work, or somehow you find a new frequency. Also radio, people are probably like, Ness, what's going on, old school. But I think it's still a nice thing that the hardest part of this journey when you do the work, like Christopher's saying, is will I lose people that are important to me? As you get older, you're just like, I said to my husband, who's a Caucasian Australian, I was like, Nick, I've been doing this shit for too long. I've been bearing it for too long. I can't anymore. I'm going to like respectfully be who I am, say what I need to say within our friendship circles or online as well. And I said I might lose friends or people on this journey. And that's where I was like, okay, you're getting to that next level. And it's painful, but who am I becoming? And like, I think doing that inner work, and that's kind of quite scary for people.
Yeah, it is scary. And I think there's a lot of things on this bicultural journey that I'm glad we dove more into it, because people might be listening to this or might be watching this or might be going through the journey themselves. And there's some people have not even started the journey yet. So if you're not even aware of this concept, you live in life, you're not even on the journey yet, right? And so the awareness is the beginning part of it, and then doing something with it, and then education, and having the courage to actually do something with it. And so for me, I think around Omek, it's probably been one of the session where we talk about the value segmentation. When you talk about the frequency, this is what comes to my mind. Like, the value segmentation with the bicultural concept is that different group of people, from especially also people of migration background, like in our community, in the diaspora community, people have a different value set based on their lived experience. So your parents' value may be different than your value because of your lived experience. Work, education, like everything, friends group, subgroup, right? And so when you taking on this journey, you need to realize you may not even need to lose them. You may understand where they are in that value they have.
Yeah.
Right? So when you go into there, you meet them where they are. And that's one of the beauty that you get when you educate yourself about this, right? When you start doing the work, when you start reading the book, when you start decolonizing yourself, you're getting all these tools and resources to figure out how you navigate the space. So I have two more questions before we close it out. It seems like we don't have a lot of time.
I feel like we just got started.
Yeah.
I know, we just warming up. And then that's what I love about this type of topic. Is like there's so much on this journey alone, there's so much in between. Between awareness and action, there's so much in between. There's therapy and there's all these things, there's a learning. And the beauty of it never stops. This is a lifelong, you never stop. The day you stop, that's the day you die. So anybody is listening to this, the more you learn, the better human you become. And so I want to have maybe quickly, because both of you have been like extremely successful in your own merits in your professional journey. And this didn't happen by accident, right? And the fact that you being aware and being doing the work, and then you kind of mentioned to the leadership, is more about the self-awareness. You can't lead people if you don't know how to lead yourself. Mm-hmm. Can you mention quickly how did you leverage this bicultural, or multicultural knowledge and experience, and then giving yourself the permission to leverage it, right? How did that help? Does this help in the especially if you get to the high level? Do
Absolutely.
you think it helps?
Absolutely.
And how?
Well, when I look back at all the things that I've done well professionally over the entirety of my career, I can trace all of them, every single one of them, to foundational experiences in Sierra Leone. So despite the political climate, despite the civil war and poverty and all the other things, there was a lot of amazing things there are a lot of amazing things that came out of it, and me included, and my experience. So when I came to the US, like I said, my experience there had brought me to the US. And it's not like I came to the US and I fell flat on my face. It was new, it was different, it was strange, there was adversity, there was sort of new experiences, but I navigated them and I thrived. And the basis of that was that those founding years, not just intellectually, but just in terms of identity and personal, belief in myself and self-esteem. So that was important. But what I also come to realize is that the challenge of sometimes, and we use the word colonialism a lot in this conversation, is the way that works is it takes who someone is and then it replaces it with something else. That's why it's not just we conquered your country and then we left. No, we conquered your country and then we came in and then we told you everything that you had done, including building all the pyramids, including the big civilizations, everything. All that stuff is nonsense. The stuff that I'm bringing is better. And then you replace it, and then you build that into the system, and people then begin to believe that over a period of time, to the point that they forgot what they once were. And then now they're embracing your thing. But they'll never really embrace it like you because it's yours. And so they're always going to be a little bit secondary to your power structure because they're new to it. And that's how it works. And then it keeps you there forever. So that's what you have to break. And what I realized is that that's not to say other countries and other cultures don't have amazing things to teach me. So the superpower that I have amassed is being able to be grounded in what I am and then learn new things. And that multiplicity of learning and the layers of it over a period of time has made me, in my view, increasingly adaptive, thoughtful, strategic, able to solve problems, because the perspective that I bring to everything is not one thing, it's everything.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference. When you're sort of steeped in this sort of sense of self-arrogance or whatever that is, you stay with one body of knowledge, one set of experiences, and that's how you look at the world through those prisms. If you colonized, you've thrown out what you are, and then you've adopted something else, and again, that's static. But when you are multicultural or bicultural, and you're able to retain the base and learn and explore and grow each time, you are just becoming so much more.
That's what the creativity
Yeah,
and the innovation and
yeah, this is
different
a glass of water, and this is something I had someone say recently, which I think is true. If I'm just one person looking at it one way, I can say, well, it's a glass of water that came out of a bottle, that came from who knows where, and that's it. But when I see the glass of water, I think, oh, water. I remember people walking to streams back home and carrying water back on their head in this bucket. And then I begin to think about people and experiences that are connected to people drinking water. So that's my experience with the word water. Yours might be
just
the bottle and the glass. Mine is multifaceted because I've just experienced water in a much different way than just a glass sitting on a table. And I bring that to everything that I do. So there's all these dimensions. So what does that make me? It makes me, I think, a much more intuitive, thoughtful, creative problem solver professionally as well.
Yeah.
So there's a power to it which people need to embrace, I guess is the final point I want to make.
Absolutely. Vanessa?
So I think even before I was a leader, I think when you are bicultural, even if you haven't explored that identity, you know what exclusion generally feels like. So the first stepping stone is, I think for most people, consciously or subconsciously, they try and create inclusion. So one of my first ever projects, like I said, I was quite junior. I was working on a global demerger of a mining company in Australia. And my role was 80, we were building the IT function from scratch, and there were 80 team members around the world, South Africa, Mozambique, Singapore, London, different parts of Australia. And the CIO said to me, your job is to make this a high-performing team. And they were a bit worried because, like, I was a bit junior, and they're like, how's she going to work across the cultures? And it's like, mate, I know what it is to be other, and I know what it is to belong. And so the ability for me to create inclusion and like teamwork across these different countries, different time zones, that was my first sort of stepping stone of like, oh, being another can actually be quite helpful because you're a little bit like a chameleon. But I think early days I was too much of a chameleon. Like, I can fit everywhere instead of owning the tree trunk of my identity. So that was the first step. And then as I became, I'd say, more senior, at a strategic level and transformation level, once you understand different cultures, you know what's not going to work from a return on investment point of view. So, for example, a lot of companies in the US might be, let's expand into Europe. And the US is, like Australia, is more of a single entity in sales. And they're like, let's do sales in Europe. And you're like, mate, DACH, UKI, Benelux. You can't just be like, they're one entity as Europe. It works differently. Similarly, when Uber Eats came into India, didn't work. It's like, you have not understood this culture, how it works, the history of Dabbavallas. You do not understand that they're very proud of their own tech, similar with Uber and Ola. So it gives you a different nuance of understanding how business and economics work. Another example is often some of the countries would put their call centers in parts of Africa or India or China, and then they'd get annoyed and like be aggressive towards these people. And so you haven't understood their cultural identity, that, for example, in India, there is a hierarchy. It is rude to disagree. You always say yes, because that is culture. So it's kind of like you have not understood the culture. And so when you are from these different cultures and you explore different cultures, it actually becomes a superpower for the intelligence of that business and that wisdom of togetherness. And the last example I'll give is when I worked at a tech company that was one of the fastest growing tech companies in the pandemic. I was allowed to hire a diversity, equity, inclusion designer, where we would design experiences, because at that time there was Black Lives Matter, there was the Asian American bashings in the US. We also had a lot of people from a Russian culture, and it was about how do we create understanding of who we are as the oneness of people before we go into all of the different structures. And they were beautiful. Like, people were so thankful from the different cultures to spend the time in the understanding and for awareness. So I think it's kind of like this morph of continually understanding each other, but then also understanding at business strategy, we are not homogenous in terms of X type of business strategy will not work in all different nations. So I think it works at multiple levels. And for it to work at multiple levels, you always have to come back to, who am I? What is my core? And how can I use my cultural awareness to educate and speak to others or understand others?
Absolutely.
Can I add one thing to that? I know we're running short on time, but the world is also now going through this transition. And there are different ways to interpret it. But one way is that there's a reaction to what has become an increasingly globalized world that seems to, among other things, it's hurt different parts of the world and different people in different parts of the world. But it has also served to empower parts of the world as well. And some parts of the world that have become more empowered are parts of these formerly colonized, tracts of geography, call it that. And that is uncomfortable for the bigger structure that created this model in the first place. And some of this tension that we see around the world is people and nations trying to figure out what's going on. Is this thing that we've created changing? And we've relied on it so much, and it's done so much for us. We're terrified that if it goes, we are exposed. And so the intensity of the reaction is creating all of this emotion and action and reaction, in the world today. What I would say to people who are multicultural, and I say so because I study these things a lot, is that genie is not going back into that bottle.
Oh, it's out.
The world is changing. It will change. And this friction should not be a deterrent to one not feeling free, if that's the path they were on, to own and claim their identity and own and claim the global view or the multicultural view that they have on the world. Because I think it's where the world is shifting. And I know it will, as has been said already, it is a source of a lot of personal growth and personal effectiveness. And it may not be welcome today in all places, but I don't think that's deniable. It will get there, and it will be a tremendous source, I think, of personal power, if you may, and power in a positive way, that is. And so people need to stay on that journey, is my final point, and not run away from it just because it feels a little messy right now. The genies are going back into the bottle. We are on a different path, and it's going to continue.
The genie's out of the box and it's not going back. So embrace it. I think maybe we'll leave it on that note. Thank you so much. There should be part 2.
Yeah, I think part 2. I was like, we're just
getting warmed up.
Absolutely.
Christopher said something and I was like, I've got something else, but like
we're
next
just
time.
getting warmed up. I think there should be a part 2 to this conversation, but there's so much to unravel and then to like dive into in this journey. But I think the biggest takeaway for me, I would say, bicultural identity is a journey. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be messy, but you have to have the courage, which we didn't get into because your book is basically about this. Like, how do you have the courage and what do you do? What are the little things that you need to do step by step, but having that willingness and taking action and educating yourself. But when you do that at the end of the things, it will make you not only a better human being, it will give you the power to become a value creation in this society. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.